The sound of bones snapping echoed through castle dungeons for centuries. What you're about to discover are 11 medieval torture devices so brutal, so designed to crush the human body that even hardened executioners would turn away. These aren't just historical curiosities, they're evidence of humanity's darkest ingenuity. I've spent months researching authentic medieval records, and what I found will shock you. Medieval torture wasn't random cruelty, it was calculated, systematic, designed for maximum psychological impact. The devices I'm revealing today were specifically engineered to crush bones, compress organs, and break the human spirit. Some were used for confessions, others for public spectacle. All of them represent the horrifying intersection of human creativity and cruelty. We'll start with devices that crushed fingers and work our way up to machines that could flatten an entire human body. Fair warning. This content is historically accurate but disturbing. If you're fascinated by the darker side of history, hit that like button now. Device 1, the thumbscrew. Let's start small but devastating. The thumbscrew looked deceptively simple, just metal plates connected by screws. But when applied to fingers or thumbs, it could crush bones to powder in minutes. Inquisitors loved this device because it left no visible marks on the body. The victim would confess to anything just to make the crushing pressure stop. One turn of the screw, intense pressure. 2 turns, bones begin to crack. 3 turns, complete destruction of the digit. The psychological effect was immediate. Victims knew worse devices awaited if they didn't cooperate. Device 2, the knee splitter. Moving up the body, we encounter the knee splitter. This device looked like oversized thumbscrews designed for legs. The victim's knee was placed between 2 spiked metal plates. As the torturer turned the screw, the spikes would penetrate deeper into the kneecap. The crushing force would shatter the patella completely. Medieval records describe victims passing out from the pain within seconds. But here's the truly diabolical part. The device was designed to crush slowly. Torturers could control exactly how much pressure to apply. They could stop just before permanent damage, then continue if the victim didn't confess. Device 3, the head crusher. Now we reach one of the most psychologically terrifying devices ever created. The head crusher consisted of a metal cap that fit over the skull. Below it, a metal plate pressed against the victim's jaw. A screw mechanism would slowly bring these 2 pieces together. The first sensation was pressure, uncomfortable but bearable. Then, the real horror began. The device would first crush the victim's teeth, one by one. Next, the jawbone would crack and splinter. If the torturer continued, the skull itself would begin to compress. The victim's eyes would bulge from their sockets as pressure built inside the head. Death came from brain compression, but not quickly. The process could take hours. Device 4, the breast ripper. This device was specifically designed to torture women. 4 metal claws would be heated red-hot in a fire. The claws would then be applied to the victim's chest and slowly pulled away. The tearing action would crush and destroy tissue. But the crushing element came from the psychological pressure. The threat of this device was often enough to secure confessions. Medieval courts used it primarily on women accused of adultery or witchcraft. The mere sight of the heated claws would break most victims' resolve. Device 5, the pear of anguish. This device crushed from the inside out. Shaped like a metal pear, it would be inserted into the victim's mouth, rectum, or vagina. A screw mechanism would then cause the pear to expand. As it opened, metal spikes would emerge from the sides. The expanding device would crush internal organs and tear tissue. Different sizes existed for different body cavities. The largest versions could expand to the size of a human fist. Victims rarely survived the full expansion. The crushing pressure would rupture internal organs within minutes. Device 6, the rack. Perhaps the most famous torture device in history. The rack didn't crush in the traditional sense, it crushed through stretching. Victims were tied to a wooden frame by their wrists and ankles. Rollers at each end would slowly pull the body in opposite directions. The crushing came as joints were forced beyond their natural limits. First, the shoulders would dislocate with audible pops. Then the elbows and knees would separate. The spine would stretch until vertebrae cracked. Finally, the victim's limbs would be torn completely from their body. The psychological torture was as brutal as the physical. Victims could see exactly what was happening to their bodies. Device 7. The wheel. The breaking wheel was designed to crush every bone in the human body. Victims were tied to a large wooden wheel. Executioners would then use iron hammers to systematically break bones. They would start with fingers and toes, then move to arms and legs. Each blow was calculated to crush bone without causing immediate death. The process could take hours. The victim would remain conscious as their skeleton was methodically destroyed. Finally, the wheel would be raised on a pole for public display. The broken body would be left to die slowly from internal injuries. Device 8. The Spanish donkey. This device crushed through the victim's own body weight. A sharp wooden wedge was positioned like a horse's back. Victims were forced to straddle the wedge naked. Weights would then be attached to their feet. Gravity would slowly pull the body down onto the sharp edge. The wedge would crush and split the pelvis. The crushing pressure would increase as more weight was added. Death came from massive internal bleeding as organs were compressed and torn. Device 9. The scavenger's daughter. The opposite of the rack, this device crushed by compression. Victims were forced into a metal frame that folded them in half. The device would compress the body until the chest touched the knees. As pressure increased, ribs would crack and puncture lungs. The spine would compress until vertebrae fractured. Blood would be forced from the nose and mouth as internal pressure built. The crushing force was so intense that victims would lose consciousness within minutes. But the device was designed to keep them alive during the compression. Death came slowly from internal bleeding and organ failure. Device 10. The coffin torture. This device used psychological and physical crushing simultaneously. Victims were locked inside metal cages shaped like coffins. The cages were too small to allow standing or lying down. Victims were forced into cramped positions that crushed their joints. The metal bars would press into their flesh. Over days, the constant pressure would crush circulation. Limbs would go numb, then begin to die from lack of blood flow. The psychological effect was devastating. Victims felt buried alive. Device 11. The Judas Cradle. Our final device represents the pinnacle of crushing torture. A pyramid-shaped seat with a sharp point at the top. Victims were slowly lowered onto the point. Their own body weight would cause the point to penetrate and crush internal organs. The process was controlled by ropes and pulleys. Torturers could raise and lower victims repeatedly. Each descent would crush deeper into the body cavity. The point would eventually pierce vital organs. Death came from internal bleeding and organ failure. But the process could be prolonged for hours or even days. These 11 devices represent humanity's darkest creativity. Each one was designed not just to kill, but to crush the human spirit along with the body. They remind us how far we've come and how important it is to protect human rights. The medieval period ended, but the lessons remain. Understanding this history helps us recognize and prevent such cruelty today. These devices are now museum pieces, symbols of an age we must never return to. Which of these devices shocked you the most? Let me know in the comments below. If you want to explore more dark history, subscribe and hit the bell. Next week, I'm revealing the secret torture chambers hidden beneath famous European castles. Click the video on screen now to discover more historical horrors.